Take a deep breath. You can breathe again, by the way. The air that we breathe. Every single minute, we breathe 10 liters of air. And for those of you, when you do sport, you breathe 2.5 times more air per minute. 10 liters of air. And yet, do you know anything about the air that you breathe? Do you know anything about the impact of the air that you breathe? What I'm going to talk to you today is about a vision that I have about how we can address a major problem that the world has, and that is air pollution. We don't see it, and yet it is there. We don't feel it, and yet we have problems. But air pollution is a major human health issue. Across the world, air pollution kills, according to the World Health Organization, over 3.2 million people per year. That's more than AIDS and malaria combined. In Hong Kong, just in the first 6 months of the year, air pollution contributed 76,000 hospital visits. It hospitalized 140,000 people. Air pollution in Hong Kong in just 6 months, and this, we're not even talking about Beijing. If we look across Europe, according to the World Health Organization, 420,000 Europeans die prematurely every year because of air pollution. And this is not talking about cigarette smokes. That's bad too, by the way. This is just talking about air pollution. And in fact, every single European loses on average 9 months of our life that we could have if we had better quality of air. So what I'd like to do is that I'd like to share with you a vision that I have, a vision that I'm working on, about how we can go from today's world where air pollution kills people, it decreases quality of life, but actually make a change substantively before we're all dead, because the air is something that we all breathe, remember, 10 liters every minute. Because ultimately we can get smart cities that are able to then collect information about the air pollution, allow us as individuals, allows corporations to take actions to improve air quality so that we can all have much better quality of life and also make an impact on the environment as well. But just to give you a little bit of a primer about air pollution. You might not know that much about air pollution, but I'm just going to describe some of the major sources of air pollution. Now, we have man-made air pollution, and we have natural air pollution. So some of you will have come here today by plane, by car, by taxi. Man-made sources of air pollution, transport is a large one. And particularly inside of cities, pollution comes from diesel, cars, buses, and trucks. That's stuff that can get very nasty. You have a pollutant called NOx, which also generates ozone, and that has incidents of strokes. It can also cause heart attacks. So we have some levels of transportation. There's clearly industrial sources such as power stations, chemical plants, even your local crematorium may be producing nasty, sooty things into the air. Hopefully not. But then we also look at natural pollutants. There are obviously volcanoes. Maybe you don't think about agriculture, but cows farting do actually make a difference. But there is actually, just wanted to highlight one source of transportation that maybe people don't think about, but just give you a feel about how bad this pollution is, but also a sense of what we can do about it. If you look at ships, the largest 16 container ships in the world generate the same amount of air pollution as 740 million cars. 740 million cars. Now, if you try to convince 740 million consumers as individuals to change their cars, that's a lot of work, as anybody that sells electric vehicles knows. And yet we have 16 owners of 16 very large vehicles. If they were to change, and the technologies exist for them all to change, and the political will and the citizen will, and I'll be describing some of the actions on that, also exist. This air pollution, that sure it exists at sea, but it blows inland, and these ships dock inside of ports, whether it's Hamburg, Rotterdam, New Orleans, then air pollution that exists out in the ships internationally affects us all domestically. If you look then at the human impact, just to give you an idea, so I can't ask you to put your hands up if you have asthma, but about 7% of the population of developed countries have asthma. And then if we add on other respiratory diseases such as COPD, and my mother has COPD, this gives you about between 8 and 10% of all populations have air pollution difficulties due to how their lungs function. To give you an idea of the economic cost of that, not just the human cost, the cost of treating asthma and the indirect costs regarding asthma in the United States is estimated to be about $50 billion every single year. So asthma is a big deal, both personally if you have it or in your family, but then also financially as well. There are cardiovascular issues. Some of these substances thin the bloodstream, constrain the bloodstream, so you have impacts of heart attacks, strokes. About 10% of lung cancers are due to air pollution. Indoor air pollution is also a very, very big issue within industrial situations, but then also houses that use kerosene lamps and sort of unsafe cooking. We're also finding new research coming out that takes us into the realms of diabetes, autism. We're finding, with new research, finding more and more links between air pollution and human health. But then one thing that's especially important to me is child development. Because one of the things that children have is they have a lesser developed respiratory system. They're physically smaller. And so what happens is the pollutants that they breathe, and remember their heads are a lot closer to the cars than our heads are as adults, the air pollution that they breathe affects them permanently. And so right now, what I'd like to do is therefore share 3 steps that I see where we all collectively can actually make a difference to actually making this a better world, a better future before we're all dead. So the first thing is to collect better data, to collect much more local data. So just to give you a feel, sort of within a city will have air pollution monitors. And these monitors exist. Across Europe already, there are about 3,000 monitors. And the city of Berlin, as an example, has 16 monitors. To give you an idea what an air pollution monitor looks like, this is a fairly typical monitor, although as it's a Berlin monitor, it's a lot more colorful than some other cities. But so this is an air monitor. It's about the same size as a Currywurstwagen. These things are relatively accurate, but they're pretty expensive. So they cost around €500,000 to buy and 150,000 euros a year to maintain. And so the cost of Berlin currently of measuring air pollution is around 4 million euros per year. But there is a little bit of a problem with this, because this solution, even though it looks really, really good and fancy, genuinely, it only measures maybe 1/4 of a kilometer of air. Because it turns out that we have microclimates. We have different places where the air is different. We have different places where people hang out. And to be honest, if there's an air pollution monitor 4 kilometers away, and you're here trying to work out for your 2 asthmatic children whether you should play inside or not, depending on which way the wind is blowing from the power station, that data is useless. There are other ways of doing this. There are citizen monitoring stations, and there are initiatives that have been done in places like London where people are using very cheap technology. This is a man in Richmond putting up a gas diffusion tube. These things are cheap. These tubes themselves only cost maybe 20 euros each, and it gives people a point-in-time moment about what the air pollution is like on their street. And these citizen things are very good. I mean, it gives you more of an insight. However, we do have weather. We do have changing conditions. And so what I've been looking at producing better local data is taking advantage of new technologies that exist around electrochemical sensors, light-detecting sensors, and they dramatically reduce the cost of sensing. To give you an idea what they look like, this is from a company called Airbase in Israel, and their sensors allow us, at a very low cost of maybe $20,000 over 5 years, to put monitoring stations, fixed, regulated, calibrated monitoring stations with accurate data. This then means that we're able to put them in more places than in a city. We can put them in every school, front and back. We can put them around universities, shopping centers, indoor public spaces as well as outdoor public spaces. And with that, we get better data. Zooming out then, the second part of the plan is action, both personal action and community action. Now, many of you here will be thinking, wow, this should be an app. Well, you're absolutely right. Of course it should be an app. But what's interesting with this, though, is that, I mean, there are plenty of apps out there for air pollution data. Right now, all of those apps are using exactly the same sources. And by the way, when these devices cost $1 million, it's governments who decide where the sensors go. The city of Madrid, for example, was able to demonstrate a reduction in air pollution levels, not by reducing air pollution, but by moving the sensor from the middle of a roundabout into the middle of a forest. This is what happens when it's so expensive. Right now, by reducing the cost, we can have a much better designed network, much more granular data. And now what does this mean? This means that a mother and a child can decide, based on the health conditions that they have, do we play here? Do we play outside? Do I go for a run around the park, or am I better off in the gym today? Providing actionable data for people to change their behaviors. But let's look at this on a bigger scale, because if we really are to change air pollution, we need to make a difference at source. We need to make a difference to the people that actually do the pollution. What's interesting, if you look at the whole community movements, whether it's Occupy movements from before, grassroots movements around democracy in countries from the United States to the rest of the world, right now there is a huge interest in things like community activity, and air pollution is one of those things that affects you today, not in 20 years' time. And so part of the plan that I have is actively supporting communities around the world to address pollution in their local areas. To give you a feel for what this looks like, and to give you a feel of the opportunity that we're sitting right next to, China have had lots of protests around air pollution. Nothing like a Turrell Square, but they've certainly had lots and lots of protests. The Chinese government, in June of this year, made a commitment. The Chinese government said, look, we understand you as the people are concerned about air pollution. And what we will do is we will invest $320 billion over the next 5 years to address air pollution. For those of you who are investors in the room, this is obviously a phenomenal opportunity, because this is a lot of money going into a serious critical source. So right now, then, the ability to coordinate community activity to address people's attention is very important. But that takes us to the third piece of the puzzle, and that's technology, and that's smart technology. Because to really make a difference to this, we need to get smart. We need to get smart on how we control the emissions. Looking at those ships that we saw, those ships can use cleaner fuel. They can also use wet scrubbing technology to pretty much keep the pollution inside the ship and have it then more safely disposed instead of pumping it out into the sky and having it drop over Hamburg and other cities. So we can control the emissions. We can have better filtering. When you drive around in your car and you've got your little air filters, you do realize that your car is pulling in the worst air you can possibly get. And yet probably none of us have really thought about the air filters we have in the car. It turns out the standard air filters that we get aren't very good. They get clogged up. We could go out and get better air filters, it just doesn't occur to us. But clearly, hopefully you can begin to see that as we gain more public knowledge, more information on what can be done about the air, we'll become more aware. And we can then pull these technologies, and that ideally will make these technologies also cheaper and more available for everybody. And then there is reduction. We can actually reduce the air pollution that is there from some very smart techniques. And I'm going to just give you 2 examples of this, just so you can visualize it. So one is the city of Potsdam. The city of Potsdam has invested in air pollution monitors on a very granular basis, and it drives the traffic system. So they're able to sense when there's a buildup of traffic, and they let the lights go green. Now, sure, that will be somewhat upsetting if you're on a side street and you have to wait an extra 3 minutes. But for the bulk of traffic going through, it's better. The real reason why they're doing that, aside from love of citizens, is EU regulations. There are extremely intense regulations in the United States, in Europe, even in China around air pollution. And by having more accurate data, we're able to have much better enforcement, and then there is a fine system coming in place as well. So everybody's much more attuned to air pollution. And then other smart solutions. It turns out there's a substance called titanium dioxide, and it really likes eating air pollution. There are streets in Texas, in Amsterdam, where they're covering the streets in this surface, and this is a building where they're using the building surface to actually absorb air pollution. And a building like this eats up the air pollution of 10,000 cars without any energy, cleanly, and it's just using a chemical process. So there are many, many smart technologies, and by raising awareness, we can develop many more technologies. But so then, just as a conclusion, what's interesting about air is that we all breathe air. Whether we're young, old, rich, or poor, we all breathe the same air. And what I'd like us to do this together, is we can actually do something about the air, certainly before we're dead. We can do something about the air right now. And with that, we can lead much better, much healthier lives. Thank you very much.